Good morning, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. I'm Paul Clark and welcome to my studio. So, what have I got for you lovely lot today? Well, it's another one taken from one of Margot's Facebook challenges, which she wittily named, I've forgotten. I know, I'm not fishing for compliments. Yes, that's it. So it's a series of paintings all based around fishing. And we've got some lovely paintings at the end from the Facebook group for you to look at. And in fact, this could be another one of my around the world in watercolours, because we're taking a trip over to Vietnam to be painting this lovely little watery scene with a boat and a fisherman or fisherwoman. So come and join me and we'll paint this step by step together. And here's the beautiful reference photo which I got from Pixabay, and I think it's of the Thung Mountains in Vietnam, but if anyone knows any differently, please let me know below. And for today's materials, now for change I'm using some Fabriano Artistico, and it's a knot finish or a cold press finish, 300 pound, 100% cotton, nice and thick so it won't need stretching. Of course, any decent watercolour paper will do. And my colours today, I'm using cadmium yellow, lemon yellow, cobalt blue, burnt umber, burnt sienna and Payne's grey. And from my range, I'm using a large mop, 3/4 inch flat, number 12 and number 6 round. And here's the pencil sketch, and if you want the free drawing template, you don't need to be any sort of member or Patreon. It's just free to download from my website, link in the description below. Off we go, and I'm wetting the whole of the paper with my large mop. Now, I was asked the other day, sometimes Paul you use a mop, sometimes you use your large Harkay. And what's the reason for that? Well, it's very technical actually. It's whichever's closest at hand at the time. Next, I'm wetting the top of the sky using my flat brush with a mixture of cobalt blue and Payne's grey and trying to get a graduated wash. And here into the water. Next, I'm using my normal green mix of cadmium yellow and cobalt blue, and the idea here really is to neutralise that white paper and just get a good base wash down. And while it's still wet, I'm just using this grey mix, cobalt blue and Payne's grey, just to get a little bit of subtle movement in the water. And I'm using my number 12 brush for this. And this is much more of a bluey green for the reflection in the water. So we need to let that base wash totally dry before we go on to the next phase. So next I'm painting these lovely unique shaped mountains in the distance with a fairly flat wash of cobalt blue and Payne's grey. And so we get a nice soft transition into the green. I'm just running some clean water along the bottom edge here. And while I've got the colour on my brush, why not put the mountain reflections into the water here. So now we need to let this totally dry, so it's a perfect time for a short break. And how about trying for the first time some rice wine? So next we're going to be putting in these Thung Mountains, and this is a classic case of layering our washes. So I'm using the same colour as the background mountains, but a much thicker consistency and stronger pigment. And again I'm wetting the bottom so I get a natural blend. letting it dry again, then bringing in a couple of these background mountains a little bit forward with a very light wash. Next, using my number 6 brush and my normal green mix of cobalt blue and cadmium yellow, I'm just putting in these distant trees. And now for these bigger shapes, I've switched to my number 12 round. And here, with a much darker value bluey green, I'm putting in the shadow side of the trees. And I'm painting this wet into damp. Next, for this big hill here, I'm painting a fairly watery yellowy green mix and carefully painting around the trees. Then painting in wet in wet a much darker bluey green mix, and this will really help to give the contrast with the trees below. And all my brush strokes are going in the same diagonal direction as the slope of the hill. And this mix can be fairly concentrated because there's already a lot of water in the original mix below. A bit of random splatting for some texture. Now this time, to get a little bit of freshness in my green, I'm using lemon yellow instead of my normal cadmium yellow. Gosh, now I am finding that the washes are drying really quickly today. Now I know this is going to be hard to believe, but it's actually quite warm here in the UK today. So I really can't afford to faff around with my mixes, so I've had a lot of these already waiting and ready to go. But the original wash is still remaining damp enough to get some nice soft edges with these washes. Ah yes, the sharpened wooden end of my brush to scratch in and score some grassy details. Now of course you could just use a simple wooden stick, but I like to have it on the end of my brush because I know it's always there. Again, I'm going to let that dry, then I'm coming back in wet on dry for a few little details in the field using my number 6 brush. Now this is a usual habit of mine when I'm painting bridges. I often forget to paint the greenery that you see through the arch. Now for the stone bridge itself, and I'm using a mix of burnt umber and Payne's grey and my number 6 brush, and this is a fairly watery consistency. Let it totally dry again, then I'm painting this river over here, and it's all going to be in greens because clearly it's a reflection of the trees above, and I'm using my number 6 brush. Now it's important that you paint in these vertical bands because that will help to give that feeling of a reflection, and this is where that wet in wet soft edge technique really helps to make the water look convincing. Now it's time to paint that big reflection from the hill above, and this is a very blue bias mix, still using cobalt blue and cadmium yellow. And here I've switched to my number 6 brush to get in some of those finer detail ripples. And here I'm using some very thick consistency cobalt blue to get in the suggestion of some vertical reflections. Again, these washes can have quite a thick consistency to them because there's already a lot of water in the original wash. Next, for this little rock jutting out, I'm just putting down a base wash of burnt umber. And there's a few little rocks over here. And I'm watering it down a little bit for the wooden boat. And a little bit of dog as well. Let's paint in the little fisherman as well. Right, so now for probably the darkest values in the whole painting, and this is a mix of Payne's Grey with a touch of burnt umber in. And I'm using the same colour for the reflection of the bridge in the water. Same colour here along the riverbank. Then clean water here just to give a soft edge and a natural transition. End of my brush to pull down some reflections. Next, I'm painting over entirely with a dark brown colour this rock here because I want to try something which I've not tried before. It's a little bit of an experiment. Now, I've used this technique of using a plastic card to create some rock texture plenty of times before, but not where I've painted a wet wash on top of a dry wash. And hopefully, and it seems to be working, I'm seeing the dry wash through this wet wash as I drag back the colour. And here, while it's still wet, I'm just dropping in some Payne's Grey dark shadows. Now, I think it's worked pretty well, but I think the contrast between the light and the dark is just a little bit too high, so I'm going to knock it back with a wet wash of burnt sienna. Okay, so now for the details on the boat, and I'm using the same dark brown mix and my number 6 brush. mustn't forget the little lone cow up here grazing in the field, and I'm using the same colour and again my number 6 brush. Now I could have masked out the cow here with masking fluid, but I knew that this brown was going to be dark enough that the green wash underneath wouldn't affect the colour. Now it's time for the little fisherman, and I'm going to start with his yellow ochre hat. Now I always find figures at this size always quite tricky to paint, so I have to try and simplify it. Just put in the basic structure and the basic washes. Here I'm just adding a bit of cobalt blue over his shirt. Now he's got his back to us, so again it makes it even more difficult to get the shape right. A little bit of Payne's grey here for the shadow, and his skirt or his trousers, whatever they are, Payne's grey. Now I've been calling him a he, but there's every chance he might be a she. I'm starting to fiddle now, so I've got to leave the figure alone. Now if you thought the figure was hard, this little dog could be even more tricky. You've really got to simplify him with the minimum of fuss. Not sure what his leg's doing here, but I'm just going to fudge it a bit. Now the figure's in, I'm just going to intensify these cobalt blue ripples in the back here. Okay, so now it's time for that lovely reflection of the boat and the figure below, and I'm using that same very heavily blue bias mix that I've used for the reflection of the hill. And a good round brush like this number 6 is perfect with its very fine point for getting those tapered ends. Now, it's always good to remember that we don't need to match the reference photo exactly. It's there only as a guide. Using your own colours, adding in things, taking away things, making it your own is really important. And I'm sure you'll see that when you look at the other versions of this painting at the end of the video. Okay, so now that's complete, I'm thinking that the water here in the foreground is just a little bit pale and could do with some more colour in it. So I'm just re-wetting this foreground area here and then dropping in that mix of cobalt blue and Payne's grey. Next, it's mixed media time, and I'm using an extremely short, and I really need to buy a new one, cream coloured pastel pencil and putting in a few little highlights. And finally, I'm taking a yellow-green pastel pencil and I'm just putting in these blades of grass that you can see in the reference photo. Just nice and quick, and just lift off with each stroke. There we go, all done, and this one a little longer than usual, about 3.5 hours. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and you'll give it a go. So coming up now, as promised, are some wonderful paintings by our Facebook group, so I hope you enjoy those. But in the meantime, please don't forget to like, subscribe if you haven't already. It is free. Leave a comment. I do read every single one. I can't always reply to them all. And of course, I'll look forward to seeing you all again next week for another Watercolour Wednesday. Take care, everyone. Cheers.